What is up, everyone? This is episode 4 of The Listening Circle. I'm Elias.
I'm Luke.
I'm Jackson.
And I'm Liam.
All right, so last episode of 2019, last episode of the decade. I want to talk for a brief moment. So we're going to be talking about our favorite albums of the year and then our favorite albums of the decade, maybe a little bit about how we felt about the year in review, maybe a little bit about the decade in review. We'll kind of see where it goes, how much time we have. First, I want to talk a little bit about where the podcast is going in the future. So as a lot of people know, I'm going to be moving to Portland, and I'm currently unsure about... I'm going to be taking a break, at least, from this podcast for a bit, and then it's possible that it will continue either with this cast or with a different cast or over Discord in person. We're still figuring that out. But the Discord server is always going to be active, so if you guys miss hearing from us after this episode, be sure to join that and share some tunes. And without further ado, let's get into it. So, our albums of the year. Oh, we didn't decide on an order for that, so I wanted to be in the middle. So why don't we have Jackson go first, and then we can have Liam, and then me, and then Luke. Is that good?
Yeah.
Or should we go...
I think we can rock it that way.
Yeah.
All right.
Perfect. Okay. So, yeah. Everyone's just going to go over their album of the year pick. And then we're all going to talk about it. We're going to open it up. And then, they'll talk about their runners-up, albums that almost made it into their album of the year. And at the end of the podcast, we will have gone through a ton of recommendations that you guys should all be checking out at home. So... Jackson, take it away. What was your pick for the album of the year?
Okay, well, my pick was Injury Reserve, their self-titled album, Injury Reserve. I just really love their sound in general, and this one was really fresh. It's really energizing. Great to listen to in a car, definitely. These are the guys from Tempe. They're critically underrated, in my opinion. They make some really good sound. One of my favorite tracks from their album, if not my complete favorite, is the Jailbreak the Tesla, which is pretty much a very bass-heavy, nice, punchy feel to it.
Yeah, I love Injury Reserve. I saw them at the Observatory like a month ago, I think.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, a lot of energy in that crowd. A lot of they're very Death Grips like.
Yeah.
I've never heard of Injury Reserve up until like you guys brought this to my attention. But
Yeah.
they sound really
You should
nice.
check them out.
Yeah, they're definitely like, I'd say like there's kind of a growing movement of like kind of experimental hip hop that's going on, like kind of abrasive and like jazz oriented and electronic kind of hip hop.
It really is.
It sounded kind of
hip-hop in
underground.
general
Yeah.
feels like, to me, it's where rock was at in like the late 70s. That's commercial zenith. And now it's starting to like splinter into a bunch of different things.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's super interesting.
Yeah.
And I think Injury Reserve is like kind of the best example of that. Their previous album before this latest one was also really good, Floss. And their first mixtape was also really good. They've just been super consistent.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and go ahead?
I was gonna say you compared them to Death Grips.
Sure.
They kind of give off the same vibe, same energy in their performances.
Yeah.
Kind of.
I would say they're like if A Tribe Called Quest had like a Death Grips energy to them.
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
way
that'd be
more heavy,
sick.
way more punkish than like A
Definitely.
Tribe Called Quest. But still has a jazz influence that's really good.
Yeah.
They really do have a good
That's the
jazz
kind of the
influence.
interesting thing about them is they have some songs that like go super hard and they have other songs that are a little bit like more mellow and
Yeah.
they're just super dynamic and all over the place.
Okay.
Good variety, I'd say.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's Injury Reserve. Jackson, did you have any like runners up?
Runners up, I definitely have a few. I'm not too sure on runners up. There's too many to come to mind.
Yeah. Yeah, there were a lot of good albums this year. All right, Liam, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So my pick for album of the year is the new Cult of Luna album, A Dawn to Fear. It just captured my attention right away, and I have been a Cult of Luna fan for a long time. So obviously I wasn't like going and expecting anything bad, but I was very impressed with just how fresh they kept it. Because after Mariner, I thought maybe this band doesn't have anywhere to go from here, because Mariner was just on another level, like
Mhm.
sonically. But I think A Dawn to Fear is a really good follow up to that, and is personally my favorite album of the year because it's just so epic, and they do what they do best in this album, like they do with their other post metal albums. It reminds me a lot of Somewhere Along the Highway, in particular, a little bit more electronic
Mhm.
version of that.
Yeah, when we played it for everyone before we started, um, I was just reading a document, going through some stuff, and when you played the track, it kind of pulled me out of it. I couldn't like help but just sit and enjoy the music. I don't really listen to Cult of Luna that much, but the particular song you played, it was a good distraction.
Yes, yes. If you can
It
get into
pulled me
them, they
out
are super
of what I was
immersive.
Yeah,
focused
they're
on.
very atmospheric and they pull you in.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cult of Luna is one of those bands that I feel like this is the case with any good post metal that you can kind of like almost meditate to it, you know?
Yeah, you can.
That's what I felt when I
Yeah.
listened to that track. I felt like I could just sit back and relax, meditate, reflect on things, just listening under that kind of music.
Yeah, but then like the heavy guitars come in and it's like a wave crushing over you.
Yeah.
I
Like,
know, right?
yeah, they're awesome. I agree with you about Mariner too. That album was like on a whole nother level. Okay, so my pick for the album of the year actually changed just like 4 days ago. I was my oh yeah, Liam, did you have any runners up?
I'm trying to think. I would consider the new Tool album, but I've also like Tool got me into music, and I thought that Fear Inoculum was such a letdown compared to their older albums that I
Yeah.
can't even really consider it. But I will say, props to Tool for at least keeping their style going, because
Yeah.
they definitely didn't like sell themselves short on that album. I'll say that much.
I know I found a runner up I came to mind.
Yeah.
It's the I Wanna Die in New Orleans by Suicide Boys.
Oh, that was
Oh.
last year.
Oh,
Oh, you're
what was it?
right.
Yeah.
It was a good
Dang.
album though.
It was a good album.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
my
would've been
sister
the
showed them.
thing, but it just doesn't bring too much new to the table for Suicide Boys in general.
I feel like with Suicide Boys, they can just keep doing the same thing over and over again, and I'll still be happy.
Yeah.
It's a good style, definitely.
Yeah. um, yeah, and then so my pick just changed. I basically throughout the whole year, I like had the album of the year question on my mind like all year, and my picks up until now were the Denzel Curry album and the Full of Hell album, and then Cattle Decapitation came out with a new album a couple weeks ago now, but I didn't listen to it until just this week, a few days before now, and yeah, there are I think one of the best death metal bands like currently out right now, and I think Travis Ryan, their vocalist, is just one of the best vocalists, like period, of all time probably. It's at least as far as metal is concerned. So Cattle Decapitation, they are. I don't really know what exactly their style is called. I hear like death grind
Yeah,
a lot.
Grind.
Yeah. I don't really know what like I guess the grindy parts would be like kind of the fast blast beat.
Yeah, it
Stuff.
depends on the album, I'd say.
Yeah. But yeah, this album, so it's death metal. It's pretty heavy, but it's also a lot more melodic than their previous efforts. I think one of the things that I like about Travis Ryan as a vocalist is that he has a lot of different styles. He has the low gutturals, he has the high screams, and then he has like his clean vocals that are still like very animalistic.
They're still
and-
good, yeah. And
Oh,
he has
yeah.
and he has the gnarliest pig screams ever.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
I love a good pig squeal.
That kind of
Um,
range is very important to have.
Yeah, for
as
sure.
as a metal vocalist, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what was interesting about this album, in addition to that, is like I think in most Cattle Decap albums, I like the part I end up liking the most is usually the breakdowns because they do really awesome breakdowns, especially with with the pig squeals and the gutturals and the double kick. But this album, there were actually a lot of parts like where they were kind of innovating with like faster styles, and there were a lot of like drum beats that I hadn't heard them really pull off before, and
And that was something that stood out to me when you played that track to me initially, is that there was just so much more nuance
yes,
than before. And
Yeah,
like, I already liked Cal Decap before, so that just impressed me.
yeah, the track I played, it started with a V. I forget. Hang on, let me look it up real quick. I think it was like Vulture or something like that. That was my favorite track on the album.
The percussion really stood out to me when you played that track. It was
Yes.
very mesmerizing and very skillful, very artful.
Vulturous was that track. Yeah.
Vulturous.
So good. Yeah, that was the track. It actually blew my mind when I first listened to it because they did like that kind of thrash metal part, and I was like, holy shit, like I had totally forgot that I was listening to Cattle Decap because it was just like so different from what they had done before. But it still had their like style. It still sounded like them, but it was just totally in a new direction. So yeah, that's my pick. Cattle Decapitation, Death Atlas. Kick-ass
What almost stole that spot for this year? What was the runner-up?
Yeah, so the two runners-up were Zoo by Denzel Curry, which I think is actually his best album yet, which is kind of an unpopular opinion, but I think it has like the most consistent bangers out of any Denzel albums. And then Weeping Choir by Full of Hell, which is like a grindcore band that incorporates a lot of like noise into their music. And I had trouble picking between those two. It probably would have gone to Denzel just because I listened to it more. But yeah, those were the two that were kind of my top picks for the entirety of this year. So yeah, and then before we get to Luke, I know Shane wanted to be here today, but he wasn't able to. He just finished a semester of school, and so he was pretty busy for a while, but he wanted to just like chill at home today and just rest up. But his pick for album of the year was Fear Inoculum by Tool, which we of course reviewed for our first episode. Go check that out if you haven't listened to it. And yeah, I don't know if we wanted to talk a little bit more about that since we already like did an episode on it, but I mean, if I had to summarize my opinion on that album, it's definitely not as good as any of the other Tool albums, but I think it was still a solid effort, and I really like Tempest. Obviously, that was
we can all agree on that.
Yeah.
Going back to it, like once the hype kind of died down behind it, it's still a good album, but I will agree with you that I think Tool's prior albums, several of them would top over this one. Yeah. But I think what really gave the drive behind this kind of album was probably the weight, is what everyone was expecting. And it fulfilled that, for sure. But I don't think it necessarily beat what Tool had previously provided. And that alone is kind of like what took it off the chart for me for being like the number one album. That getting to me, that is my runner-up. That almost took it for me. Yeah. But when I kind of reflected back on it and listened to it again, I was like, you know what? I could probably sit down with a different Tool album and still have a better time than with this one, regardless, even though it is good.
Mm-hmm. And then, so what was your pick for album of the year?
What took over Fear Inoculum was probably The Search by NF. That album found its way to me at a particular time where I actually really related and could empathize with the message that he was giving throughout the album. That entire album, he's very personal about it with his audience and who's listening to him. I'm not much of a rap fan. It definitely gives off like a young Slim vibe, like a young Eminem vibe for sure.
Yeah.
But it hooked me, and it's definitely because I think the message that he was telling to the people that hopefully are listening it's very personal. It's very real stuff. It's stuff that I think a lot of people go through that, they don't really share. And I think that is really what kind of toppled for like the throne of best album for me for 2019. It was the message behind that album.
Yeah. And I will say, when we listened to the opening track off that, The Search, I believe it's called.
It was The Search, yeah.
Yeah, title track. I definitely liked it a lot. I liked it more than I expected it to, because I guess my own expectations with white rappers is so low because everyone outside of them is kind of mediocre at best. But MF really surprised me, so I will say big props to him for making a very, very surprising album, to me at least, that he just took his lyrical chops and made it very clever and self-aware.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. I just want to say you forgot LP, other white rapper who's like...
Oh, no, LP is great. I will... Sometimes, like, I will say, even, like, listening to Run the Jewels, I'll forget that LP is white. Like even while he's rapping on the tracks.
Hey, but don't talk shit on Lil Dicky, though. That was a beast.
No, I would never.
Yeah, I liked it, too. The guy definitely has a talent for, like, rapping pretty quickly, which I like. And the beats, the production was solid on that track we listened to. And I do like how you said how it has like kind of a, tells a story. That was why you made the Eminem comparison. I mean, like when I was in middle school, as we all were listening to Eminem at that age, like that's kind of what drew me into his music is like the ability to sort of like hear his like perspective on life. You felt like you weren't just listening to someone talk about something in the abstract. He was talking about something that was personal to him.
It's different when you hear the artist really get personal about what they've experienced and throwing it on a track for other people to hear. It's more inviting. It's not about what the artist is doing and like the great music they're providing and oh look at me. It's more like, hey, come check out like what I've been through my music, and it's something that people can relate to.
Yeah, it's really what makes NF special in my book.
Yeah, he does that with most of his tracks throughout that album, and even in his other prior albums to this one. When I heard this one, I went and checked him out, and I gotta say, the guy's very talented. He's very good. He's in a good spot right now.
All right, so now on to the big question that's on everyone's minds at home listening. What would we say are our favorite albums of the decade? So I think each of us has like 2 to 3 that we wanted to shout out, and we all have a main album that was our number one. So we're going to go ahead and start with Luke this time.
I think as far as just shouting one out, I'm probably going to have to name Billie Eilish's When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go? I don't really listen to pop music, but this one found its way to me like in the past couple of months, and I really liked it. I thought it was very different from standard pop music, and I don't know, I vibed pretty well to it. I enjoyed it, but definitely did not make for like best out of the past 10 years. I would say in 2016 the album Magma by Gojira came out, and it found its way to me at the beginning of 2017. And I remember listening to that album on loop, high out of my mind, for like a week straight. And what was very interesting going through that whole like experience with that kind of music is Gojira, the way they structure their lyrics and the message they put into all their songs, it's very, very woke music, I would say. Like their lyrics are very deep, and they really try to throw the message, I guess, at, for lack of better words, at one's soul, at one's sense of self. And
see the song Flying Whales. That's all I have to say about that.
And I think when I listened to that in the state that I was in, it really, I came out of it with a different sense of, or I guess, sense of self-awareness, how I carried myself and how I viewed myself. And I think that's why that album really stuck out as the best album for me of the decade, because it kind of, I wouldn't say it changed me, because I feel like that's like cliche answer, but it definitely it changed my perspective on things. So that's why I think it goes to that for Magma for album of the decade.
All right.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, like, as far as that album, I remember I was a huge Gojira fan, like, when I was getting into metal, like, more heavy metal in high school. And I remember for a while, I think I started listening to them maybe 2014 or 2015, so Magma wasn't out yet. And my favorite albums were From Mars and L'Enfant Sauvage. And I remember Magma being a little bit of a disappointment, just because it, like, wasn't like as heavy as the stuff they were doing before, but specifically the songs Silvera, The Cell, and Lowlands were like pretty heavy rotation for me. So yeah, and I've seen them like 3 times, and they always play songs from that album, and they kick ass live.
You've actually seen them live?
Yep.
How are they live?
They're amazing live. They're one of the few like metal bands where I feel like it's not just, you know, a mosh pit in one area and then a bunch of people standing with their arms crossed around Gojira. Like, everyone moves to Gojira, and yeah, the crowd energy was fantastic. And they really like get into it live too. You can tell they really enjoy playing their music.
That's good.
Yeah.
I mean, with the energy that they provide, at least from what I've heard, like, I've never seen them live, but when I do listen to them, they sound very, very powerful, very, almost like, it gives a very dangerous vibe, and I feel like if I were to go to one of those shows, the crowd would mimic the very same energy, and that's good. That shows that they really they really deliver during live performances. I would
Yeah.
love to see them live.
Oh, they absolutely do deliver. The first time I saw them, they were opening for Mastodon, and when Mastodon came on, it was just snooze fest because Gojira just totally set the bar so
Which is-
high.
Well, also
That's fair.
didn't Mastodon just release like their 2011 or 2012 or what album
think,
was that? That was right after Crack the Sky.
After Crack the Sky was The Hunter, but the one
That was not as much a disappointment as the one after that, though.
Once More on the Sun. Oh, I disagree. Once More on the
Really?
Sun. I think Once More on the Sun's a pretty good album.
I don't know. Well,
Dude, wait, I feel like
I'll
I
get
should have
into
gone
that
to
right
that
now.
show. I would have been like the one dude actually fucking headbanging to Mastodon. I love Mastodon.
Oh, I do too.
Nice.
Yeah, I think it's just like the way they play live is super boring. They just kind of like stand there. They don't seem like they want to be there. Kind of like how I described.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I've never seen them live either, so
Yeah.
that's a different picture.
Yeah, but I remember, Gojira just like blew everyone's heads off. They were so fucking awesome live. And yeah, so anyway, let's so we're gonna go in reverse order from last time. So I think me and then Liam and then Jackson.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
All right, so all three of us, our number one was the same artist, which is interesting, and they're
Yeah.
definitely like kind of the artist that I think kind of changed everyone's lives almost, like changed music forever. I don't know. People are either gonna think that that's super cringe or totally agree with it, and that's totally fine. We love being divisive on this podcast. That artist is Death Grips. My favorite album was The Money Store. That's still like my number one. Actually, if you go to my Last FM, I'm pretty sure I have scrabbled that album 1,170 times. So that's like average 100 times per song. And I discovered this album back in like 2015. Actually, Liam was the one who showed me this album.
Ah, yes.
Yes. You showed me to it. You showed it to me in January of that year, and then you showed me the song "Get Got," I think,
Yep.
and it was kind of sitting in my Spotify starred playlist for a while, and I listened to it every now and then, and I was like, okay, it's kind of cool, I guess. It's a little weird. I don't really get it. Because I tried to listen to the rest of the album, and I was like, I don't know. I don't really understand like what they're trying to do. And then I think it was like September of that year that I was like just in the mood for some like really aggressive hip hop. You know, I hadn't discovered like a lot of trap music yet or like any of the other kind of like heavier side of hip hop. And so but I had remembered in the back of my mind, oh, there's that Death Grips band. I kind of faintly remember them being something that I might be into. I don't know.
That Death Grips be hitting different.
Yeah. And so I put on that album again, and this time I was just absolutely hooked, and I could not stop listening to it like nonstop. And that just like became my favorite album like ever. I think it sits among three albums that I would consider a perfect 10. The other two being Jane Doe by Converge and Loveless by My Bloody Valentine. Both of which are not in this decade, which makes this the easy contender for my album of the decade.
That's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
When an album can really like stand out as like your favorite album of all time.
Yeah.
Definitely.
You can just jam at them at any point. You can pull them up no matter where you are, and you can have a good time listening to them.
Oh yeah, it's actually crazy because I don't like with every other album that I've ever listened to, including like my number 2 of the decade, my number 3 of the decade, 4 or 5, like all of these albums, I would say that, like I get tired of them sometimes, and this album I just don't ever get tired of. Like I can just listen to it forever, like until I die. I guess I should describe the album for people who aren't familiar with Death Grips. They're a band that kind of combines hip-hop and electronic music and industrial music and kind of punk.
Little bits of noise here and there,
Yeah,
too.
little
yeah,
bits of noise.
definitely noise.
They're very abrasive, they're very energetic, and this album in particular I think kind of has like a futuristic feel to it almost.
Yeah,
just with
definitely
like
does.
all the synths that are going on and samples. All this.
Master of synths.
Oh yeah, the master of synths and samples. The musicianship on here is really impressive, and I think people tend to overlook that when they first listen to it because it's just there's so much going on that it's so overwhelming at first. But like I think upon multiple listens, this is what makes it so good and have so much replay value is that every time you listen to it, you hear more intricacies in the album. Get God is probably still my favorite song on the album, although it's like very nearly tied with like Hacker.
I would
Bitch
say every
Please.
other song grows on you with that
Yeah.
album. Like
Yeah.
Get God just like blows you away, and then everything else just like sets you back up to
Yes.
really understand what Death Grips is actually getting at
Yeah.
Yeah.
with their art.
Yeah, Blackjack, I've seen footage. There's so many great tracks on there. And yeah,
I've
like
seen
you said, they
footage,
all
I've
kind of
seen
grow on
footage.
you over time because at first, like some of the songs fade into the background or whatever, but then other times you listen to it and it's like, wow, like I had no idea like that I would like that, end up liking that song so much. So yeah, Death Grips, The Money Store, fantastic album. Easy pick, favorite of the decade. My runners up, I want to shout out Cosmogramma by Flying Lotus, which is another like pretty experimental, like kind of trippy electronic album. I think Flying Lotus. There's two artists that made me want to get into sound design, and those two artists are Flying Lotus and Emon Tobin. But this album in particular, kind of like I want to say it like transformed just the way that I like view like how to put sounds together to make music and like the possibilities of sampling and blending different things together.
It
And-
inspired you.
Yes, absolutely inspired me, and I think it's one of those albums that is the greater than the sum of its parts because when you listen to the individual songs, they're pretty cool, but I think it flows really well as an album, and it kind of like dips into a lot of different ideas. But that's what makes it feel like it's kind of like always flying forward is that it just dips into certain ideas without like fully building them out, but it kind of like you get to feel a lot of different emotions like one after the other.
That's definitely how you know when it's a passion project too. Because
Yeah.
when you come across albums that are just static across track to track, it's like, I'm just
Yeah.
gonna put on something else right now.
Yeah,
I'm not
exactly.
even gonna finish this.
They're
So-
just going through the motions.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, but this album, I mean, you can like kind of feel his soul like through the music. The closing track on that album is really cool. I had kind of a moment listening to that song when I was like about to see Flying Lotus at the Hollywood Bowl, and just like the lights looked really pretty, and that last song was on, and it was like really like every time I think of that song, every time I hear that song, I think of that now. And there's a lot of really good tracks on that. I think Thundercat plays bass on a few tracks. Thundercat's always really cool. Yeah, really good album. And then I just do a quick shout out because I'm kind of talking a lot. Animals as Leaders, The Joy of Motion
Yes.
is another fantastic album. And one more. Run the Jewels 2.
Nice.
That's
There we go.
good.
Yep.
Solid pick.
Good pick, yeah.
All right, Liam, you want to go?
Yeah, so I'll actually get to my runners-up / shout-outs to these albums first because we don't want to get too heavy with the Death Grips.
Yeah,
Talk one after another.
for sure.
So my runner-up for Album of the Decade is, frankly, To Be Kind by Swans. That album left such a ridiculous impression on me, going back to it so many times. Like, when you first hear an album like that, when it's so big and epic and expansive, and it goes all over the place, sonically, lyrically, just, it does, it's like, it's that album to me that does everything that you could ever want out of a rock band. Yeah, To Be Kind is just a ridiculous 2-hour odyssey down Michael Jarrah's brain, but it's like the best thing ever because he's very, I don't even know if I want to say animated, but the way he performs on stage and on his albums is very like unique to him, unique to Michael Jarrah. I just always appreciated that about him and his music. But To Be Kind was just so ridiculous in how epic it was, and none of the tracks are not even bad for a split second. Everything just makes sense.
There's never a dull moment.
No, it always enthralls you. It always enthralls you. Even if it's not being particularly heavy and it's being more like whacked out, like just kind of weird or just doing whatever it's doing, it's still very captivating and it's kind of hard to not enjoy it despite it not being like something you can just like say like, oh, that's just a great thing. Like Michael Jarrah really adds a lot of depth to the way he presents himself in his band, in his projects. So I always found that very captivating about him and about To Be Kind specifically. But my album of the decade pick is Jenny Death by Death Grips, because when that album came out, I was just obsessed with it for probably 6 months at least, and it still has left a very deep impression on me as well, because that is Death Grips, I think, at their most creative, at their most varied, but also still sounding just incredibly powerful, incredibly punked out, especially with the way the album opens up with I break mirrors with my face in the United States. What a title track. But it's just a ridiculous album. It takes so many different twists and turns, like with songs like On GP that really do break up.
That song.
Yeah, that song is so different from the rest of the album, but it's still so great in just the way that Death Grips knows how to make great music.
Yeah.
So that's my thoughts on album of the decade.
Yeah, hell yeah. I'm really glad you picked that because On GP is like that's a pretty emotional song and like
it's one of their more emotional songs. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's super not something you would like just expect from listening to the rest of the album or the rest of their discography.
No.
Yeah, it touches on some pretty deep topics and it helped me through a really tough time when I was working a shitty job a couple years ago. So props to that song and props to that album. Death Grips is probably like one of the most consistent artists of this decade. I think that's why we have so much love for them on this episode.
Oh, absolutely.
Most definitely.
All right, so let's continue on. Let's see what Jackson's picks are.
Well, for album of the decade, I have a band that is tragically a one-hit wonder. Batushka and their album from 2015, Liturgia. It's like almost like a Greek Orthodox black metal album.
Huh.
And it's really just pretty. Like, they're actually Polish, but it's just really pretty. They have like the Greek Coptic chants, and they have like these like bell parts, and
But it's all blended in like a metal fashion?
it's all like a blackened metal fashion.
Huh.
And it's honestly a lot different than most traditional black metal, and it's just so beautiful. It's an emotional journey too. You feel there's highs and lows, and then there's this like one part, and I think in like the third or fourth song, where they have like a really kind of sad part, leaves you just wondering what's gonna happen next, and they have this beautiful, just clean guitar riff, and it's just these beautiful chants, and it's just so uplifting, and it's you always take away something new every time you listen to that album, really.
Yeah, for sure. Where'd you find that album? Like, where were you at when like that album kind of like, when it came your way during that time?
Honestly, I was just I think I was living in Mission Viejo at the time, and I was like in between jobs and trying different classes, and I honestly had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and I was starting to feel kind of down that I wouldn't really amount to anything, but that song just kept me up, and it's always really fun to listen to it on a bus or just traveling, because it's like a perfect 40-50 minute album that will just last a perfect bus trek. And I was gonna say, yeah, I was originally just to browse through YouTube to find it, and when I found it, it was just so beautiful. I couldn't stop listening. I shared it to Liam when we were going to his favorite Raising Cane's, and he loved it too. And it's just so it's kind of atmospheric as well. But
I like
really,
that kind of music.
It's just an emotional journey. It's so nice to listen to, even on like the shittiest headphones. You can enjoy it.
I'll have to give it a listen. That sounds really cool.
I highly recommend you do. And then runner up would have to be for album of the decade. Runner up would definitely have to be Kids See Ghosts by Kanye West and Kid Cudi. That's also really nice, emotional, pretty, just feeling album. Honestly, in my opinion, one of the last great Kanye albums, unfortunately. And it was a real good comeback for Kid Cudi from Speeding Bullet to Heaven. It was really solid, fun to listen to, and I always just end up feeling just nice and good and wholesome.
Yeah. Sweet comeback indeed. That 0 to 10
Yeah.
turnaround.
Yeah, on the Fantano Melon scale.
Yep. All right, what was your album of the decade then?
That was Liturgia.
Oh, really? So you changed it from the Death Grips album?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Cool. So, oh yeah, Shane's pick. Since he's not here, he wrote 3 on here, and I don't know what was his number 1, but he wrote Death Grips, The Money Store, Baroness, Purple, and Stromae. I'm gonna butcher this. Racine Carré. It's a French. I think it was like a Euro dance electro swing album.
Yeah, Electro Swing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really didn't expect that from Shane. That was a really
No, neither did
interesting
I.
pick.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was really really fun and kind of catchy.
Yeah.
And yeah, I enjoyed it because he mostly listens to I think like a lot of metal and so that was kind of a left turn there. But
Yeah, he's
but I liked it.
much more cultured than I thought.
Cool. So yeah, those are our picks. Since we still have some extra time, I wanted to go through, see how much we agree with the god of all music websites, Rate Your Music.
Oh, of course.
Players B.
They have.
There are some albums we didn't get around to, we'll admit, like the
Yes.
new Swans album. I still have not
Yes.
listened to Leading Meaning, even after I blew To Be Kind for like a minute.
So their number one, it's pretty obvious what their number one would be. So this is, just for anyone who doesn't know, this is like an amalgamation of like ratings from like thousands, probably tens of thousands of users across the internet who all, have album collections, and then it kind of compiles it into like this chart of what they as a community like top albums are. So if we look at the decade list, the number one obviously is To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar, which I think, I don't know, maybe this is unpopular opinion, I think that album's a little overrated.
It's only overrated because it's hard to go back to and listen to again. I think that album blew me away completely when I first listened to it, but when going back to it, it's like these songs aren't enjoyable on their own. It's weird. It's like you need the full album experience of that album.
Yeah, I feel like
Although I will also say How Much a Dollar Costs is my favorite rap songs of the decade, so
yeah.
I really do think that. So.
That's definitely one of my highlights from the album. And I think I agree with you that it's like I described Cosmogramma, it's kind of like the album is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yes.
Where like if you go back and listen to like a single song from that album, it's a hit or miss whether it's actually like good on its own, but the album kind of tells a story. I think that's what people like about it. I'm not much of a lyrical person, so the album didn't do much for me, but there's definitely a few tracks from there that I really, really enjoyed, like All Right, Blacker the Berry, How Much a Dollar Cost, a lot of those. The number two was My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy by Kanye West, much to probably Fantano's dismay.
No, and mine.
Really?
I don't like that album. I think it's his most overrated album.
Oh, shit.
But Kanye's reception has always been so mixed and bizarre. Like, can you really call his albums overrated even? I don't know.
I mean, he's on a whole different scale than us mortals. So.
Actually, let's just mention on that topic, Jesus is King, definitely biggest disappointment of this year.
Oh, yeah.
We can all agree?
I think so.
Yeah. That album was a huge disappointment.
Jesus Todd, in my opinion. So.
Jesus Todd.
Yeah, I don't know. I liked MBDTF. I think that was... I don't know. I'm not super into Kanye, but like I think I've listened to each of his albums at least once, and I remember this being one of my favorites. And well, not just remember, I've listened to this a lot. But yeah, I wouldn't call it anywhere near my album of the decade.
Graduation is best album there.
Graduation is best album. Isn't that one of his like poppier ones?
Oh wait, what am I? No, I'm talking about the one before that. College Dropout.
College Dropout.
Yeah.
College Dropout was his first album.
Or no, it was Late Registration.
Late Registration is his second album.
Yeah, I get all mixed up with old Kanye.
Yeah, most people, if
Definitely
you look at the RYM ratings for each one, College Dropout is the second behind MBDTF, and then Late Registration's right underneath that, I think.
Okay.
God, I'm so out of the loop when it comes to fucking pop music. I don't really mess around that
Is
stuff.
Kanye pop? He started off as like hip hop, but
He definitely not
no,
poppier.
he's just a genre.
Graduation was poppy.
I think
Yeah.
hip hop sort of became pop, right?
That too.
Yeah.
But that was
Parts
like
of
later
it.
in the 2010s. Like
the
Graduation
commercial
definitely.
zenith part.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Their number 3 was Good Kid, Mad City by Kendrick Lamar.
That
Kendrick's
album
breaking
was
it
really
big.
enjoyable to me.
Yeah.
I still go back and listen to it occasionally.
Yeah, I liked it. I like a few tracks. It's kind of the same as Chip and Butterfly for me. There was like a few tracks that I think are awesome, but I don't know. I don't typically go back to.
There definitely are
ones.
some weak points on Good Kid, like that you can like spot more easily, like Poetic Justice. I
Yeah.
don't like that song that too much.
Mm-hmm.
I can't really think of other tracks though, because I love most of the tracks on that album,
It is a good album.
and it has a very good narrative flow.
Mm-hmm.
Both that and Two Pimp Butterfly do though, so
Yeah.
that's just what Kendrick does.
I think this next one was on one of your lists, Liam. Black Star by David Bowie.
Oh yes, I was considering that album. I still love that album, but going back and listening to it again, I thought that that album was a little odd because the title track Black Star is far more just dreary and depressing compared to those other songs in that album. So it does do a good job at setting you up for the lyrical path it's going down, but it's also very heavy-handed.
Yeah.
Like it's a very heavy-handed album. Like it's not at all metal. It's not at all this, that, or the other. It's just a very experimental album for David Bowie. He really was influenced a lot by actually Death Grips and Kendrick Lamar
no way.
for making that album.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Yeah, I wanted to experiment a lot with electronics and just throwing out whatever they could.
I have a lot of respect for like old artists who have been in the game for a while who also have respect for modern music and how it's evolved, you know?
Exactly.
Definitely,
exactly.
that needs to be recognized.
Yeah.
I think.
Because I think especially when you look at like the old metal guys and how they love to talk shit on like hip hop.
Oh
and-
yeah, it's
Yeah,
weird.
the old heads in hip hop.
Yeah.
They'll talk shit on each other too, though. So
That's true.
there's no
What's that?
Real
nothing
life
off limits with
whatnot.
them.
Simpsons meme. The how do you like? It's like metalheads versus other people. Metalheads versus metalheads. Worst enemies.
Oh yeah.
The number 5 here was Atrocity Exhibition by Danny Brown.
Excellent album.
Hell yeah.
Excellent album.
Yes.
I really want to check out Danny Brown a lot more because from what I hear, he's got a really unique sound. It's like funky, it's fun, and his personality is in the music just something you don't hear a lot and something I definitely want to get more into because whatever I do hear, I really like.
Yeah, Danny Brown's another really consistent artist. I liked the album he put out this year too. And like the 2 that came before this one were also really good. Number 6 with Death Grips the Money Store, of course.
Yep.
Then Sufjan Stevens, Carrie Ann Lowell.
I still need to listen to that. I like Sufjan a lot, but I just was not interested in that album. I thought I just would not dig like something that personal. At least at the time that it released. Maybe I just never like just thought of him in the mood would have been right. Because that album definitely is very depressing.
Yeah.
Very depressing.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I have a lot of friends who are into that group, but I haven't really checked them out yet. Swans to Be Kind. Is another
Yes.
one. Frank Ocean, Blonde, number 9. That's kind of interesting.
I liked it a lot, but
Yeah,
we
that
discussed
actually-
it a little bit.
I think that actually made Pitchfork's album of the decade number 1.
Really? Wow.
Just right above Kanye West, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy.
Interesting.
But yeah, and then Pitchfork, there was just some interesting ones. I haven't listened to Beyonce's self-titled that made number 3. To Pimp a Butterfly number 4. Let's see what else is on here. Where did the Money Store? Where did the Money Store go on Pitchfork's list? That was number 117.
Wow.
Interesting. We had Deaf Heaven, Sunbather at 123. We had Run the Jewels 2 at 131.
I was also considering Sunbather for album of the decade, but that album's flaws just don't ever get better with time.
Really?
Unfortunately, I don't think so. It does drag out as an album, but I do actually think the longer songs are more solid. Ironically enough, it just as an album experience, I think it can be kind of exhausting, even to me. Who
Yeah,
enjoys that
I-
Yeah, there are a
so
lot.
much.
I think I agree with that.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. That's definitely for me like more of a song by song album than like a whole experience.
Yeah.
Because
Sure,
I
yeah.
really, honestly, I could say like every one of the first 5 songs on that album has like had an impact on me. Like, other than the title track, I think like tracks 1, 2, 4, and 5 are like all excellent to me. But yeah, as an album, it gets kind of tiring. But yeah, so we went over Rate Your Music, we went over Pitchfork, and how those lists compare to our lists. Do we want to, if we had to like pick a unanimous, like if we had to agree on an album of the decade, I wonder what that would be.
I'll put in my vote right now for Jenny Death.
Yeah,
But it is only because I'm such a huge fan of that album.
I could agree with Jenny Death, because I think that's probably like my second or third favorite Death Grips album. But yeah, I mean, like if we all had to like, sacrifice our personal opinions for like a podcast, if we had to like sponsor like a number one, listening circle certified album of the decade that all of our listeners are gonna go listen to right now.
What was that one great, fantastic album by Taylor Swift in 2010 that nobody remembered?
Oh man.
All right, well, moving on.
we went there. Yeah.
Perfect.
So, I think for me, opinions aside, because I definitely, ever since I got hooked on Gojira, I have that album. Whenever I'm in a rough spot or I'm going to work and I need something to jam out to, I'll pop on Gojira. But if I'm actually going to have, like, and this might sound weird, an unbiased opinion of a collective decision for, like, album of the decade, regardless of who is at the table, I would actually go with The Money Store by Death Grips. I've heard from other people saying that that's actually been, like, one of their favorite albums in, like, the past couple of years. They haven't used decade, obviously, but I have heard from other people saying that they've really enjoyed that album and that it's, like, almost left a weird and unique impact on, like, the 2010s.
It woke up a lot of people, including me, to, like, music nerdiness on the internet. So I feel like that album is actually really influential in that dimension. Like, you can actually, like, point to it.
Imprint is the exact word I use to describe The Money Store. It really put Death Grips out there in their sound. And I think, for me personally, the 2010s are really heavily influenced by Death Grips sound as their experimental, whatchamacallit. It's just...
Even Kanye ripped them off, so...
Yeah, they really made a mark on me, honestly. I'm a huge fan now.
Yeah, honestly, when you think about, like, all of the artists that sort of, like, became popular because of the influence that Death Grips had on them, like JPEG Mafia. And, like, you could even argue Clipping, maybe, even though they emerged, like, at the same time as Death Grips. So
Clipping is great.
Yeah.
Saw them live. It was really cool.
Oh, yeah, they were at the Adult Swim Festival. Yeah, they were super awesome. Yeah, who else? Like, Injury Reserve, of course. Yeah, Death Grips definitely, like, kind of made their mark on, like, music in this decade, I think. And The Money Store was the album that popularized them, right? Because that was their only, like, major label release before they got dropped from their major label, right?
Technically, I think No Love Deep Web did come out on Sony Music, but they leaked it, like, a few weeks before.
Well, right,
like
they leaked it on torrents, so it didn't end up coming out on the record.
Oh, they did just found out canceled them.
Yeah.
Funny because that's like the one Death Grips album I have on vinyl.
Nice. Well, there you have it, folks. The Money Store is our listening circle certified album of the decade.
I'll agree with that. I like Journey to Death more, but The Money Store definitely, like, I would not have the friends that I do because of that album. I think most of us can agree with that.
Death Grips really is a bonding experience. Fun for the whole family.
Fun for the whole family.
Yes.
When I have kids, I'm going to get them started early on that.
Here's an interesting question. What do we think that Death Grips is going to do in the next decade? Since, like,
oh, man.
They totally, like, they started in, 2011? And they had,
yes.
like, every...
Ex-Military came out in 2011.
Yep, and every year, like, Death Grips did something. And now, like, what do they have left to do? Where do they go from here?
Frankly, I think the only place they could go would just be more heavy on the electronics. Like, maybe try to take that, like... at least in terms of the instrumentals, take that punk influence completely out. Like, no electric guitars, just a very heavy, like, almost like, maybe like electronic body music almost, you could say, inspired by.
I'd say possibly some, like, trance-type psychedelic stuff. Something that makes, like, a surreal ambient type feel.
Ambient?
Because I think they could really do something along the lines of, like, I don't want to say shrooming music, but... I could definitely see that.
Do you think Death Grips would ever do an album without drums?
No.
Zach Hill would complain.
No, honestly, no. I would be very disappointed if they did.
Zach Hill is way too much a part of the Death Grips trinity of Ride, Morton, and the Great Hill.
Yeah.
You know what? I wouldn't mind if they didn't change a thing. Because they have such a unique sound, and they have such a unique presence in what they do in their own niche music industry and their audience. I feel like that they can ride that for a long time. I feel like they can milk that.
I can definitely agree with that.
Yeah. I feel like they can earn a lot from just, I mean, obviously not repeat the same thing over and over like that. That's a general thing, but like just staying true to their roots, I guess, is the best way to summarize that.
I think so, yeah. And I think there's like, you know, it's hard to say because we're not in the band writing the music, but I feel like there's still a lot they can do, even like within the sound that they've sort of established, you know? And they've proven it with all the prolific output that they've released this decade, you know? Every album kind of sounds different, but it's still very much Death Grips, you know?
Oh, yeah.
I love their, like, fun, cryptic lyrics, honestly. Like, MC Riley, you don't know what they mean, but they're definitely noticeable. Like, I got the nasty in my taxi, you need a lift, you got the nasty in my dick. That's definitely
awe-inspiring.
Awe-inspiring. Yeah, some of the things that come out of MC Ride's mouth are indeed awe-inspiring, but maybe not for
He's a national treasure.
All right, cool. Well, you have our artist of the decade, you have our albums of the decade and the year, and Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy holidays. Go listen to all those albums right now. We're probably going to put together like a playlist of all of them.
We should.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Have fun inside.
Wow.
We'll see everybody in 2020.
Yes. Yes. There's like a 99% chance we will continue something in 2020. And stay tuned to all our social media. Join us on Discord. Don't be inactive. Don't be a lurker. Okay. Engage.
Yeah, post a Comrade Jeb, so that way him and I aren't just posting random ass socialist memes all day.
Yes. We need more socialist memes, guys.
Yes,
we gotta get all the
People's
socialist
commas are jab demands it.
All right. Goodbye, everyone.
Peace. Skeet skeet.